Hey, welcome to another exciting episode of the Give Me Liberty podcast right here at Liberty University, the Standing for Freedom Center, where we're defending life, liberty, and truth to ensure the foundations of freedom exist for the next generation. And I'm joined today by the lovely Dr. Carol Swain. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure because I'm from Southwestern Virginia, so I'm right at home.
Welcome home. I'm so glad to see you, and I'm so glad you made it. And one of the things that I was so curious to hear, and you can share with us on this podcast, is what are some of the truths that transform your life? Give us a little bit of background about yourself.
Well, my life, compared to most people in academia, is just totally non-traditional. I was one of 12 children, born and raised in rural poverty, Southwestern Virginia, Bedford County. Spent the early part of my life in a 2-room shack with no indoor plumbing. And we were often hungry. We scavenged for food sometimes, and missed a lot of school. One year we missed 80 of 180 school days. We all failed that year. And people entered my life later. I married at 16, had my first child at 17, and by the time I was 21, I had 3 small children. And during that time, I struggled with depression. I did suicide gestures where I would take bottles of pills and always make sure I got rescued. I was very successful at getting rescued. And a medical doctor doing one of the hospitalizations told me that I was intelligent, I was attractive, I could do more with my life. And I had forgotten that there was a time when I was smart, because when I was in school, I could miss a week or 2 of school and come in and make an A on a test. And so his encouragement led me to get my high school equivalency. And then I was working in a nursing home, and one of the African orderlies told me that I was smarter than a lot of the people he went to college with. I should go to college. And so those words led me to go to the community college. And then while I was there, I earned a degree in business, and then I was steered into academia. It was never anything I thought I'd be doing.
So that's incredible. And I immediately am thinking, and this is a follow-up question, the traditional trajectory, a lot of people think, if I'm not going into college at 17 or 18, I don't do it this way or that way, if I'm not done by the age of 22, it's all over for me. Your story is different. Your pathway is different.
Well, sociologists would say that someone like me was doomed to fail. That I was underprivileged, I had everything against me, and I was supposed to become a statistic and repeat the cycle of poverty in my family, and my life defied those odds. And during that time, I can say now that God put people in my life. Back then, I didn't know what was going on, but they encouraged me and they steered me. I didn't know anything about becoming a university professor. When I went to the community college, I wanted to be a store manager. I was going to work at the mall, and I applied for jobs, and I was told I needed a 4-year degree, and so I decided that I would get a 4-year degree and that I would become an honor student. And what I did was check books out of the library, purchase books on how to make A's in college, how to take essay exams, how to do objective tests. I applied the principles, and they worked.
Wow. Incredible. So there's a little bit of autodidact there. Like, you think of some students who you go in the classroom, you're doing all the extra study of how to be a successful person as a student, right? You're trying to learn the mechanics all along the way. You attribute this to God, though. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was not raised in a religiously devout family. I always knew that there was something larger than me guiding my life, but I did not have a Christian conversion experience until I was in my 40s. But I can say that I was a person that I mentored well as a mentee, and I looked at people like, when I was a student, I didn't dress like a student. I was probably dressing more like my professors, but I didn't know what I was doing. And so when someone told me what I needed to do to be successful, if they were successful, I followed their advice. And one of the things I can tell you as a Black person from poverty, that almost all of my mentors did not look like me. And these were people that did not treat me as if I was a victim. They did not lower the standards for me. They made me believe that if I worked hard, I could do whatever I wanted to do. And so I grew up believing in the American dream. I always, loved my country and believed in the America. I love the America that I knew once, not the one today so much. But I am a product of the American dream, and I don't see my story as a racial story. When I share it, I have people, all different ages and races, come up to me and say, your story is my story. Let me tell you where I came from. And so the America that I love, all things are possible, and they were for someone like me.
Amen. It's truly inspiring. I think about the youngest generation, where so often they're being indoctrinated into this idea of victimization, and it's being lauded and championed if you're not a part of a victim class. More recently, transgenderism and
Right, I know.
whatever pansexual category there is, the alphabet soup. If you're not a part of that victim group, you're not important. It's almost like those are the new heroes.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
Because during the time that I was getting my education, I had no one telling me that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do it because of the color of my skin. And I actually was born and grew up during the era of the segregated South. So I actually was born into systemic racism, and I saw it collapse in the 1960s with the passage of 3 major civil rights acts. And so when I started my education, I knew that non-discrimination was the law of the land, and that I had an equal opportunity to achieve. And during the time, it was the 80s when I actually, no, late 70s when I started college. And so, there was an interest in African Americans coming into the system. And so you had affirmative action, but I personally never wanted to be seen as an affirmative action baby. And so it was important to me to be an honor student. And so that's why I worked so hard, but I also knew that I could distinguish myself. And so I went to predominantly white schools. Every professor learned my name after the first test. Now, if I had been white, I would just have been just your regular student. No one would have paid attention, but because I was black and I was an honor student, it worked to my advantage.
Wow, incredible. So I want to talk, and just transition to talking about, you're a fellow with the Texas Public Policy Institute?
Yes.
And so
A distinguished
senior
fellow.
I like that.
I was never a distinguished professor at the universities because I was too conservative. And so I get my title.
Yeah, well, they got it right at the Texas Public Policy Institute. And as a native Texan, once a Texan, always a Texan. I'm living in exile, by the way, in Virginia, so pray for me. But I love what it is that you're doing. Talk to us a little bit about the Unity Project and how it is that you're tackling the issue of critical race theory, because I think this is super important.
Well, I can tell you first that my books have always been considered prescient, starting with the first one that won the national prizes. And it seems like I'm a little ahead of everyone else, because some of the stuff, about the critical race theory and stuff, after the Obama administration, after he was elected, by 2010, I noticed that something was taking place that was different. And that was when I had been in academia around, critical race theory and postmodernism and all of those ideas, but then I started gradually seeing things being implemented, across disciplines and in the classrooms, and they were not theories anymore. It was almost becoming a way of life. And I left academia in 2017. I took early retirement, but the years before I left, the last 3 years, I was teaching a course on the impact of communism on American political thought. And I had gone back and reread things and really dug into critical race theory. And I was so shocked because as a graduate student, I was interested in Congress. I was a congressional scholar. I was not interested in taking a lot of the political theory courses. I was not interested in critical race theory. But then I realized how much it was impacted my life. And then I regretted that I wasn't paying more attention to what they were doing. because all of a sudden, what they were doing, it sort of become the norm. It was accepted. And I saw myself really on the outside, even before circumstances arose that I left academia. I just saw what they had accomplished. And you can marvel at what they did it, how they did it. But what I saw with the critical race theory that went to K through 12, and the parents noticed it after COVID during the lockdowns, it had already been in the public schools, because the last few years I was teaching a new kind of undergraduate showed up on campus. And it was a freshman that had answered all the major issues in the world. I mean, they came to teach you. And they had been so thoroughly indoctrinated. As freshmen, they were very different from the students that I had encountered over the years. And I taught for 28 years.
Wow. So you were seeing basically this whole new crop, a younger generation, that what were they there for? It wasn't for the study or for,
No, they already knew the answers about, whether race and gender. I mean, they had already been indoctrinated in high school, or maybe it was middle school. I'm telling you, 2017 I left, but at least 2 or 3 years before that, I started seeing a very different kind of student appear on campus.
Yeah. So
they were not there to learn, they were there to teach you in case you didn't know.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that the education model, and feel free however you want to answer this, but the education model in a way has been irreparably harmed, or is there a way we can bring it back?
Well, I mean, I really applaud the parents' movement across America. We know about Moms for Liberty, Moms for America, and just these various groups where our parents started to stand up. And I can tell you that before they stood up, I have given many talks with white parents that were complaining. And I'm saying, what's wrong with you people? Why do you allow your children to be bullied and shamed? Because in America, we don't do that to children. And the parents would say, I'm afraid that if I speak up, my child would be targeted. Right. And so when they began to organize and come together, and as organizations, you saw the white parents standing up, and the mothers not being afraid of being called racist, because the left uses epithets to silence people. And whether they're calling you a xenophobe, a homophobe, or Islamophobe, or a racist, it's meant to silence you. And now, election denier, conspiracy theorists, and for me, a conspiracy theorist is anyone who gets too close to the truth.
Yeah.
And that's how they try to silence you. But I think that the parents are making a tremendous difference, and it's cutting across party lines, racial lines, religious lines, national lines, because there are people that have come from other countries. They did not come here for what we audition out in the schools. And so you see that this is not a white movement, even though there are people that would argue that pushing back against critical race theory and critical queer theory and all of this stuff, that it's a white supremacist movement, and that's not true. And I think that's one of the reasons now that the polls are showing that suburban white women are moving towards the Republican Party. Well, why are they moving towards the Republican Party? They don't like what's taking place in the schools with their children, whether it's transgenderism, biological males competing in sports, and just the racism that violates our civil rights laws. It violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, and it's something that it cannot stand. And I would imagine that the Supreme Court can see what the rest of us are seeing, and that when it comes to the affirmative action cases, I don't see how they cannot strike it down. And once they strike it down, it will impact diversity, equity, and inclusion training, because a lot of that is discriminatory against males or against whites, and the CRT. So I think that the handwriting is on the wall for those ideologies, but that the left never gives up. That it will continue to come back again and again.
You mentioned, I appreciated how you started out, because you did mention communism, and then as you were talking about this ideology, it relates, doesn't it? Marxism.
And the critical queer theory,
yes.
Because, okay, we focus on CRT, and everyone's talking about CRT,
right.
But before CRT, there was critical theory. and it was all aimed at deconstructing and dismantling everything that was traditional, whether it was the family or churches, government. You can just go down the list of media. I mean, they had a plan, and that comes first. And then critical race theory is just a subcategory of critical theory, critical queer theory, and the transgenderism, the attack on males as being toxic, having toxic masculinity. All of those are subcategories, the feminist theory of critical theory. And for many of us, we were all focused on critical race theory. I wrote a book, a co-authored book on critical race theory. Meanwhile, the left moved on to the queer theory and the transgenderism and all of this stuff like that. It's almost like they're one step ahead of us. And so the critical race theory is important, but there are other things they're doing in the classroom that are probably more dangerous.
Okay, real quick, and I know we're kind of running short on time, but what are those other things? Are there some areas that it's morphing? It's like it's almost like a virus that is changing, right? Even as we're trying to fight the virus or the cancer, it's starting to change and morph into other things.
Well, during the time I was at Princeton, I can remember the discussions about the curriculum Great Minds. Mm-hmm. And so now, in some places across the country, it has appeared as wit and wisdom. I mean, it just sounds so innocuous, wit and wisdom. Who wouldn't want their children to have it? But we know that within that, they have exposed our children to pornography, books about suicide ideation, as well as a biased version of civil rights, as well as queer theory, just pornography, and they've used that as an umbrella. The other thing they have used is social emotional learning.
Yes, I'm glad you brought this up.
What that used to mean, like 10 years ago, all that's been taken over. And something that's innocent, it used to be innocent, ACT, the testing company, go to their website, read the articles on their website. They're clearly pushing an agenda, an LGBT agenda. And so if you're a guidance counselor, if you're a teacher and you're preparing your students at your school, you would think that I have to do this, or my students when I do well on the test. And so they have tried to cover every base, but fortunately we are on to what they're doing. And one of the things I don't want to miss telling you about or sharing is that in 2020, after the George Floyd death and the riots and the companies giving millions, if not billions of dollars to Black Lives Matter, I formed a company called Unity Training Solutions. And then all of a sudden the left started grabbing the word unity training, and so my company is called Real Unity Training Solutions, and it offers an alternative to DEI and CRT, and we were recently approved by the state of Tennessee to offer school board training on the prohibited concept laws. 37 states have passed laws prohibiting certain kinds of concepts from being taught, and the laws are not being enforced. But Tennessee has passed a law that all school board members have to take a course on the prohibited concepts law, and my company is one of 2 that was approved to compete with the Tennessee School Board Association.
Fantastic. Real Unity Solutions.
Real Unity Training Solutions.
Training Solutions. That's fantastic. And then just finally for our listeners, where can they find your material?
Well, I have 3 websites, but one is Be the People News, and I put my media clips there, and there are links to my books. There's CarolynSwain.com, and then I have more than, I have Unity Training Solutions, Real Unity Training Solutions, and a nonprofit, Be the People nonprofit. So I'm very busy, busier now in retirement than I was before.
I see you everywhere, and I'm just thankful that I'm seeing you today here at Liberty University.
I am so delighted to be here, and I'm looking forward for the invitation to return.
Absolutely, it's coming soon. Dr. Carol Swain, thank you so much for all you do. Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Texas
Constitutional Studies
at the Texas Public Policy Institute.
They gave me an identity after the universities tried to cancel me and strip me of my identity. TPPF gave me a new identity.
Fantastic. Well, I love what they're doing. I love what you're doing. And thank you so much for joining.